Tom Flanagan has been an academic for more than 4 decades. He's also been a pundit. He's helped out the old Reform Party get off the ground. He was a campaign manager for Stephen Harper, and he was instrumental in bringing Harper and the Conservative Party to power. What all his activities have in common is his skillful use of language. And yet it was language that caused his entire professional world to crumble, literally within a couple of hours. He has written a book about the experience. It's called Persona Non Grata: The Death of Free Speech in the Internet Age. And we welcome back to our studios Tom Flanagan. Nice to have you here again.
Well, it's great to be here, Steve.
For those who don't know the background, I want to start at the beginning, which is February 27th, 2013, University of Lethbridge. You're invited to give a talk about the Indian Act. During the Q&A portion, you were asked a question, and you gave an answer. We're going to play a little bit of tape, as those who saw it uploaded on YouTube might have seen it, and then we'll chat. Roll tape.
A lot of people on my side of the spectrum, conservative side of the spectrum, have been on kind of a jihad against pornography and child pornography in particular. And I certainly have no sympathy for child molesters, but I do have some grave doubts about putting people in jail because of their taste in pictures.
That's disgusting.
You know, I don't look at these pictures. You know, it is a real issue of personal liberty. To what extent we put people in jail for doing something in which they do not harm another person. They don't.
Oh my goodness.
And that's the moment that kind of changed your life, and I want to just sort of get into that a little bit with you. As you were answering that question, and you were hearing the audience start to get more in your face in its response, did it feel to you like you were getting into increasingly dangerous territory?
No. I mean, first of all, the audience was a very hostile audience, and there were lots of times during the evening when they were much louder than that. It was a raucous evening. This was, 2 minutes out of 2.5 hours, and there were a lot of Native activists there, and they were shouting me down from the beginning. So this moment didn't seem any more hostile than any other. And nobody at the time suggested to me that it was a gotcha moment.
Although the guy said that on tape.
Yeah, he said it on tape, but I didn't know he was taping it. I didn't hear him say it. And so the people who had invited me didn't seem to think there was anything unusual. I mean, there were a number of people in the audience who came up to chat with me afterwards. Not everybody was hostile. So no, I didn't think there was anything exceptional had happened at the time.
And there was no little voice inside your head that said, I wonder if I just said something a little bit off that I'm going to regret?
No, there wasn't. And I'll tell you why. I was not seeing this as a political event. I was seeing this as an academic event. I was invited by a town and gown association to speak on a university campus in a classroom. The fact that it was a hostile crowd, I've had a lot of hostile crowds in my life. But as an academic, I've always tried to answer every question that's put to me as part of the ethos of the classroom. And to me, that's very important, that you not try and duck out. Whereas this had been turned into a political event by people who were looking for ways to damage me, and so I should have followed the politicians' ethos of trying not to answer questions.
But you had been around politics, obviously from the introduction I gave,
Yeah.
You've been around politics for a very long time. And again, I wonder, when you walked into that room and you saw that this was not going to be a room filled of milquetoast students who were just going to listen to everything you said. In fact, there were some people in that room who had a view on what you were going to be talking about. Again, why didn't an alarm bell go off?
Well, I wish it had. I mean, obviously it would have been easier for me if it had, but the fact is that it didn't, because between the academic life and the political life, it's kind of like flipping a switch. They both use language, but to very different purposes. In the academic world, you're trying to find out what's true and false. That is the overriding goal. In the political world, it's not so much a question of what is right or wrong, because in politics, in most issues, there is no absolute right or wrong. What you're trying to do is build a coalition of support to help your team come to power. So it's actually rather difficult to be in both, And I didn't flip the switch. If I had flipped the switch, I would have been, I think, capable of handling the situation, but I never flipped the switch.
And as a result, on that drive from Lethbridge to Calgary, your world changed and you didn't even know it. Right?
I had no idea what was going on until I got one phone call on my car phone on the way telling me that I was being dropped by the Wild Rose Party, but other than that, no, I didn't have any idea what was going on.
Well, let's go through the list. The Prime Minister's office, some ministers of the Crown, your University of Calgary, where you had worked for how many years?
45 years.
45 years. Preston Manning, the former Reform Party leader, whom you helped launch that party. The Wild Rose Party, as you just pointed out, now the official opposition in Alberta. The CBC, where you had been a regular commentator. They all severed their links with you. Globe and Mail, too, I guess we can add to that list. You were a month.
No, I don't think so. No, the Globe stood behind me. They delayed a column that I was supposed to write for a couple of weeks, but the Globe never dumped me.
Well, the rest of that list is a pretty good list anyway, of people who dumped you. What did you start to think as these groups one by one called you and said, you've said something, we can't abide it, you're out?
Yeah. Well, it's really hard to take in. You can't assimilate it all at once. At least I couldn't. And particularly without a group of people to advise you. You're kind of out there by yourself. And so it took quite a while for me to assimilate all of this. Weeks really before I began to understand the depths of some of it.
Did you get it?
It took weeks, months. Actually, it was only through the process of writing this book that I came to understand the dynamics of mobbing, and I came to understand that what I had done was a tactical mistake of not understanding the nature of the event, that I hadn't actually said anything that I should be ashamed of. I'm happy to defend everything I said, but what I was using was classroom shock language, which I use all the time in my career to try and get students to recognize the gravity of issues, but not in that kind of venue. It wasn't the right place for that kind of language. So it took a long time, and writing the book was the way that I finally came to understand it. In the list of people that you mentioned condemning, it is important to point out that Preston Manning quite quickly recognized that he had made a mistake and got in touch and apologized, and I'm back working at the Manning Center. And the president of the university has also expressed regret for the way that she handled it. So not everybody has come to terms with it, but some important people have.
Which rejection stung you the most?
Well, I think Danielle Smith, because for heaven's sakes, I was actually working for her on a small contract. I had just managed her political campaign. I had been her teacher at university 20 years ago and had helped her get started in her career. So that one surprised me more than anything else.
Somehow she got a message to you saying, this is a mess, but I'll be in touch in a few weeks and we'll talk again?
Yeah, but then the follow-up never came.
So you haven't spoken to her since then?
She came up to shake hands at a dinner a few weeks ago, but there wasn't really any conversation. So no, I'm still waiting for that conversation.
Your relationship with Stephen Harper I think it's fair to say, is already pretty strained because of a previous book that you wrote that he didn't want you to write. Mm-hmm. I read that book. I didn't see anything so egregious in that book that I thought he ought to be upset about, but he was upset and he didn't want you to write about it. Knowing that he feels ticked off at you already, you then go and mention some more stuff about him in this latest book, where you call him, someone who suffers from despondent moods, who is suspicious, secretive, vindictive, Nixonian. Why did you feel the need to put all of that into this book?
Well, it's important to understand that to get the picture of what happened. Like, why would the Prime Minister's office go after me in that way? I wasn't working for them anymore. I hadn't worked for Stephen Harper since January of 2006. Why would the PMO feel the need to attempt to destroy my career? They were the ones that really unleashed. I mean, when the Prime Minister of the country goes after you, even if it's through a surrogate, that's a signal for everybody else in the country to pile on. So to understand why that happened, I think you have to understand some of the background, personal background.
You think he was taking advantage of you while you were down in order to give you a couple of more kicks?
Well, I don't know if he was involved in making the decision that day. It could be that he wasn't. but he certainly did nothing later to try and undo the damage. So he obviously, it met with his approval, even if he didn't do it that morning.
Your book does obviously raise some much larger questions that go beyond your own personal drubbing and get into issues of whether or not we have free speech in this internet age in this country. What did you conclude?
Well, what I concluded is that the new technology, which we all love and can hardly live without now, but it does pose a new set of challenges for speech in the public sphere. The pace now, the 24-hour news cycle, augmented by social media, the lack of editorial control over what goes up on social media, all of this raises a new set of questions and sometimes makes it difficult to discuss things in any intelligent way. So it's not so much that it kills free speech, although it may in particular cases through the mobbing mechanism, but it also makes it difficult just to have any kind of intelligent discussion.
At the very least, would you say it if not kills, at least chills free speech?
Yeah, I guess, and well, here I am again, so I haven't stopped talking. But I did get correspondence from people who said, gee, what happened to you is a monitory tale, and I better be careful about what I say in public. I think there is a chilling effect. I don't think anybody would volunteer to go through what I went through.
It must have seemed pretty terrible at the time, but here, as you point out, here you are. And in fact, you got a book deal very shortly after this all happened, right?
Yeah.
So were you really persona non grata?
Yeah. Well, no, actually, the whole thing was an elaborate plot in which I staged the event to get 15 months of publicity prior to launching the book.
I'm sure that's not the case, but...
Yeah. Well, I think what saved me was support from friends more than anything else. I was denounced by a few people what they all had in common was that they were sort of at the tops of organizations, and I guess they thought they were protecting organizations. But I almost immediately started to get hundreds of phone calls and emails, even letters. People still send letters of support from friends. In some cases, people that I hadn't known before, but they got in touch sometimes to say they supported what I said, sometimes to say they disagreed with what I said, but they still thought that somebody should have the right to say that. So it was that support that kept me going.
But maybe that's one of the lessons, and I'd really be interested in your view on this. Maybe in this internet age, where people can be, what's the word you used? Not drubbed, but
Mobbed
online, en masse by thousands of people in over a matter of a few hours. Maybe we're in a new place where there are some subjects that are too taboo even to ask questions about. What if that's the case now?
Well, it's increasingly that way. The questions of all sorts and different subcultures within the society develop their own codes of political correctness. I think what made my situation strange was that although well known as a conservative, I violated the political correctness of the conservative tribe by raising questions about the appropriate punishment for viewing child pornography.
Because as a conservative, there's only one position you can take on that.
Of the conservative organizations today, yeah. Now, I violate political correctness of the left all the time, but nobody thinks I belong there, so that's just kind of routine politics. It's kind of like what happened to Larry Summers, the president of Harvard, who is a man of the moderate left. He's a Clinton supporter, and Secretary of the Treasury, all this stuff, and then when he's president of Harvard, he refers to some research about the normal distribution of talents and what that implies for the success of women in science, and gets driven out of one of the biggest positions in the entire world. If he had violated the political correctness of conservatives, nobody would have cared. But because he was perceived to be a member of the liberal tribe, he couldn't raise questions that are raised all the time in scientific journals.
So yours was a new case. You violated the political correctness of the right.
That's right. And every tribe now has its own political correctness, and so the public sector is increasingly a minefield where you're going to violate somebody's political correctness.
You wrote in the book, "Free speech is not our natural estate." What do you mean by that?
I think free speech is something that we as a society have to cultivate and have to work at, and it requires not only proper legislation, constitutional protections, but it also requires a set of conventions about how you treat people in public. I think human beings, by and large, would like to react to speech with coercion when they don't agree with it. They would like to shout it down, get rid of it. So it's a real work of art to have a society where disagreement is not only tolerated but even valued. And we have to keep working at it constantly. And if we don't, I think we will see it erased.
The university
eradicated.
campus used to be that place, right?
Yes, used to be.
Not anymore. Too much money at stake now.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressures, and I'm not saying it's not at all, but there are many pressures within the university, and lots of people looking over your shoulder for what you say, including ministers of the crown demanding that you be fired, activist groups, risk-averse administrators, equity officers. I mean, there's no end of people that are watching you.
Let's talk media. Quote, moral panic and excitement of mobbing triumphed over all normal canons of journalism because folk devils have no right to speak. Mm-hmm. Meaning what?
Well, meaning that I should be shouted down. And I was just interviewed on the CBC, and I was able to tell them that I thought the CBC failed in their duty. They are the largest news gathering organization in the country, and yet they never actually did a story on the event. They did stories on what people said about me, but they didn't do a true story on what had actually happened. They didn't investigate it.
Did they not interview you at the time?
No, I was never. I wasn't invited for an interview. They didn't send a reporter down to talk to people who had been at the event and get their impressions. They did know all they did was repeat what was in the YouTube video. I don't think that's the highest standard of professionalism. And that was actually typical of too many in the media. I will say TVO was an honorable exception. A year ago invited me on for an interview and gave me a chance to try and say what had happened. But it's the pressures of time, I think, combined with perhaps taking signals from prominent politicians. I hate to think that was the motivation, but the pattern, the politicians threw some stones and everybody else started picking up rocks and throwing too. It was the politicians that set the signal. That's kind of scary in a free society that politicians can influence media coverage that way so quickly.
Have you, at the risk of getting into this actually, rethought your position, which you tried to enunciate on the day in Lethbridge, Alberta, on child pornography and the viewing thereof?
Well, I've certainly tried to develop it in more nuanced terms, and I never got a chance to spell it out, and so I can see why somebody looking at it might get the wrong impression about what I thought. But yeah, my position is still basically the same. I think that child pornography is a great evil and should be illegal. But as with all evils, there are levels of wrongdoing, and so I think that the question that I was kind of crudely addressing in that forum was, what is the appropriate level of punishment for the lowest level of offense for people who may look at a picture, access it, may see it online, do nothing else. They don't make the pictures, they don't distribute the pictures, they don't sell the pictures, they don't touch, come close to any living human beings. If we want to make that illegal, what is the appropriate offense? And I think that there are punishments other than imprisonment. I think imprisonment is a serious thing that should be reserved for the most serious kinds of offenses. So, I mean, let's talk about fines, let's talk about mandatory counseling, let's talk about house arrest for a period of time, let's talk about cutting off internet access. There's lots of things we can talk about before we say we have to go to jail.
I got the sense, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I got the sense after I asked that question that you took a half a second in your head to say to yourself, let's just answer this much more carefully this time than I did that day in Lethbridge. And I wonder if that is one of the consequences of that day in Lethbridge.
Well, it's a consequence of being aware of being in a different setting. See, again, I go back to, I was in an academic setting talking about the Indian Act. Somebody blindsides me with a question on a completely different topic. I should have just not answered it at all, but I wasn't in the slightest prepared to answer it because I was down there to talk about the Indian Act. So now, for a year, I've been thinking about child pornography and how it should be dealt with.
And you talk about it in the book.
And I talk about it in the book, and so I'm prepared to give a more sensible answer. So, again, as 45 years in the classroom, students ask you questions all the time that you don't know a great deal about. But I've always tried to answer it to the extent that I could. So I made the mistake of taking that approach for people who didn't really want an answer. You know, they didn't care what the answer to the question was. They were only hoping that I would say something that they could turn into a clip for YouTube.
Just finally, you clearly have never seen yourself as being part of the sort of center left of this country. And now the Wild Rose has kind of disowned you, and the Prime Minister's Conservative Party has kind of disowned you. And I wonder whether you feel you have a political home in this country today.
Well, I see myself as sort of post-partisan, you might say. I'm still very interested in politics. I still write about it. But I'm proceeding now on questions of issues or political strategies, but not as a supporter of a party as such. You know, when I go to vote, I may still vote for a conservative candidate, but I don't see myself as supporting a party. But I'm still interested in issues and strategies and tactics and all the, you know, all those aspects of politics.
And do you think now your life, 15 months later, you're not really persona non grata anymore, are you? I mean, you're kind of, are you back where you were?
Well, I think I am they might call it the conservative intellectual world, if that's not an oxymoron for too many people. But, you know, in conservative think tanks and advocacy groups, and I mean, they never really cut me off at all anyway, but now I'm back there all the time with these people, as I always have been. Political parties, no, I'm not back in the political parties, but that's not where I want to be. You know, and I'm 70 years old. I was looking for a slower pace in any case. You know, politics is very exhausting, so I have no desire to get back into active politics. So if I can keep up with my research and writing and commentary, I'm still doing a little teaching, even though I have retired from my long-term teaching job, but I still do a bit of teaching once a year. So I have a pretty decent mix of things right now.
Good. Well, we're glad you could spare some time for us here at TVO, and it's a good book. It's a really good read. Very provocative, as you always are, Professor Flanagan. Well worth the read. Persona non grata, the death of free speech in the internet age, raises a lot of good provocative questions. Tom Flanagan has been our guest. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.